Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video we're going to be talking about metal bodied moving Fillister planes. Hope you enjoy. So what exactly is the metal bodied Fillister plane? Well, if you jump down here I'll show you. So I have two different types here. So I have this Stanley style, which is a number 78, depicted by this shorter fence. That's the main difference, and also up here the adjuster arm is just a lever style. I have this knockoff Record 778, so it's not actually made by a Record, and it's depicted by having the two rods here and this longer fence that goes the entire way along, and a threaded depth adjuster up here. They're the main two differences between the Record and the Stanley. I'm not sure about modern makers, I didn't get time to check them out, but I believe probably Veritas has something similar to one of these. So what do we actually use the metal bodied Fillister plane for? Well, it's primarily used to make rebates, both along and across the grain. So I'm going to set the Record style off to the side, and we're going to keep working with the Stanley one today. And I just want to go through all the parts so you can see, and then there's one vital setup that we have to do if we're going across the grain, and another vital setup that we have to do if we want this to actually work properly. So let's jump down here and we'll go through the parts. Got a lever cap here, we have a blade that comes in, and if we move this fence out of the way we can see just here that this blade comes all the way through, right up against this edge here, which is actually our depth stop, and that's a good reference to actually reference your blade up against. We obviously have the fence and the fence screw and the little rod that the fence moves on. Little screw here for the depth adjuster. Now up under this depth adjuster just here we have this funny looking three-way thing, and that is called a cross grain nicker. Then obviously we just have the blade, the depth adjuster lever, and the lever cap as I suggested before. Now one thing that's different with this style of plane is that it is set up with a bull nose in the front here, and we actually have this secondary spot, so we can actually put the blade right up in this front section here. So if we're doing this where we want to have like a captured back panel where you're using a rebate, you can actually use that blade to just get up into those tight areas so you can move it forward. But back here is the main positioning that we want it, because if you're using it up here you don't have your little depth cut adjuster either. So this one's completely manual when you come up here. And I just wanted to talk about how this lever cap works. It works like most lever caps. You have a screw here, another screw here, so when you push the pressure here it cams off this and puts the pressure right down on the edge here and holds that blade in place. So now that we know how this plane works, or we know all the parts, I wanted to talk about these two vital things, and we've just covered the parts, but two vital things when we're using this that we have to make sure are in the correct spot, otherwise it's not going to work properly. First vital thing, I'm just going to remove this fence out of the way so you can see it easier. And so because this comes all the way through, we actually, if you can see just here, I'm not sure if you can see that, the blade is overhanging the edge of the sole, and this on the inside here. Now we want that to do that because what that's doing is giving a relief to the blade and against the body here, so it doesn't jam up. So although you would think that it should be dead in line, you actually don't want it dead in line, you want it to actually overhang a little bit here. And that's the same with rabbet planes as well. Any of them that go right across, you need that slight clearance on the inside when you're doing a square area, because otherwise it will jam up and you're going to run into issues. So you don't want that dead flush. And you can change that a few ways. You can rotate the blade a little bit, or you might have to change the squareness of the blade to allow you to get the adjustment you want. And if it is overhanging too much on that inside, maybe you can adjust the angle of your cut and bring it a little out of square to sort that. But generally what I've found is if you square it to the outside edge of the blade, at least on the Stanley and on the Record, the outside, if that's squared across, generally gets you the right movement so that you can actually get the blade square across. If we look down the sole just here, our blade is just here and it's dead square across with it overhanging on this edge by maybe 1 millimeter. So it's not overhanging a lot, but it's enough to give that clearance you want. Now in my case, maybe 1 millimeter is a little too much, and then when we're going across the grain, the vital thing we have to use, this cross grain nicker just here. We need to make sure we put that down so that we can sever the fibers ahead of the blade, so it'll actually remove the fibers and also stop it just smashing and tearing the grain. And you can twist it and move it out of the way when it comes to doing the long grain. You can leave it there, but there's not much point. You might as well turn it out of the way so you don't blunt it. Now in an upcoming video I'm going to show you how we can sharpen this little cross grain nicker. For the moment this should be sharp enough for me to show you how it operates and how it works. So the next step is I'm going to bring a piece of pine in. Now just a standard piece here, and the edges are squared because when you're coming across this grain you obviously need that squared to get that reference, so you need to make sure that they're both square, otherwise your rebates, well, they're not going to be square, they're going to follow that edge. So I've now got the piece of wood set up flush with the edge of the bench so I can obviously hold this off the edge and actually operate it here. Now when we do this we always do cross grain first, so when we do the long grain we come through and clean anything up. Now to deploy this cross grain nicker is a fairly simple process. So what we do is you want to get a screwdriver that's going to fit in there. Now this one doesn't quite, but I'm going to make it work. So this is a very, very short screw. So you need to undo this and then rotate the cross grain nicker. Now the reason it's got 3 of them is you can have 3 edges and operate for a long time before having to sharpen this. So you can see this is a very fiddly process and you don't want to lose that screw. So then it's as simple as rotating one of them down like that and doing your screw back up, which is a very, very fiddly process, so just bear with it and take it easy. So once that's done up, you want to check your depth. Now you don't want to be taking a very heavy cut. Just like with the grooving plane or the plough plane, you want to have only a very, very shallow depth of cut, otherwise it's just going to make it rather difficult to use. So just bear that in mind. I have the blade clear 1 millimeter, maybe less, and then you can adjust that up and down the depth of cut depending on how much strength you got or how easy it is to move through the grain of the particular timber that you're using. So now we've got that done, we obviously want to set our depth of cut, which I'm going to make, let's say 6 millimeters. So when it comes to setting your width, you want to take your width off the blade because the blade overhangs slightly on this side and not off the sole, just so you know you're getting it correct. So in this case I've got that set to 12 millimeters. Now you just want to make sure with this style where there's a single rod, sometimes this fence is not 100% square because this gets a little bit bent, and I did have that problem on this one and I had to kind of just bend it back to correct it slightly, which you might have seen just a few minutes ago. I noticed it. So just take note and make sure that your fence is actually setting square. Now when it comes to using one of these planes, we have a blade that's coming right across, we have a fence that might not be covering the blade up entirely, as you can see here, so you've got to be very careful to not cut yourself on that super sharp blade. So just be extremely careful with this, and just watch where you're putting your fingers. Keep them up on the front on the bull nose or on the side here and push up against the fence up in front of the blade. Don't push your fingers in anywhere near that blade. You just got to be extremely careful and cognizant of that. I have cut myself on these ones before, so just note it is an issue. I have sometimes taped the blade up to prevent that if I'm just doing a whole bunch of one size over and over and over on a whole project. So just be aware, you've really got to watch what you're doing with your fingers there so you don't cut yourself, because that blade, you've sharpened it yourself so you know it's razor sharp, so it will really injure you if you're not paying attention. So you have to pay attention with a tool like this. So now we're going to jump down here and I'm going to show you how to do a cross grain cut and then a long grain cut. They're obviously fairly similar, but I just want to show you how the long grain cleans up the cross grain So let's jump down here and we'll get started. So if you're going to do this operation like I am here, so you want to have this set so it's either just overhanging or in line with the edge of your bench to help reference the fence. And I've obviously got it held down with some holdfast just here off camera. So you're going to have to find some way to hold this down to do this process. And I did find this fairly difficult until I put the dog holes and got the holdfast on the top of my bench here. And this just makes it a lot easier. So we've obviously got our cross grain here. Now we want to keep our fingers up on this edge so we keep that fence referenced along this edge of the board here. Now remember, we've got our cross grain nicker just here. So to start this, we want to push our fence up against it, watching that we don't cut our fingers, and we want to lightly pull that cross grain cutter backwards a few times for it to establish a nice cut. Now this cross grain cutter probably does need a sharpen, but it's still doing the job that I require it to do. So we've now marked this cross grain cut here. So we want to come in right up this top edge here, starting only a little bit in, and we do a little cut. Make sure that your board is not going to move like mine just did. Make sure it's held down nice and tight so it doesn't move. And we're going to slowly work our way back in this direction. So you can see I'm running into a few issues here with how far my blade is overhanging the edge. And where this blade is overhanging, there's a couple of ways that we can just tap that back. So you can loosen this and just bring this back edge across, or you can just get a little hammer and give it a couple of taps, and it'll just reduce that overhang here ever so slightly. If it's squeaking like it was just then, get a bit of white candle wax, just rub it along the sole here and on the fence, and then you're good to go. It should stop the squeaking. Now I'm finding that my cut is a little on the light side, so what I want to do is just adjust the depth ever so slightly. And as you can see, once you've established all the way across, you just keep going until you reach the depth stop here. All the way across, and you just want to make sure you're not tipping it this way too much, so you can actually keep it engaged nice and flat, because it's easy to actually tip it this way. Now I think my depth stop actually moved there a little bit. Yeah, we've moved up to about 8mm. You need to really lock this screw down to stop this moving. Sometimes I've had to put pliers on it to stop it moving, just to give it that extra little bit of hold. So we can see just here where there's a little bit of damage just on this piece up here. So when we come down this long grain, we'll remove that. A little bit of splitting just on the edge here where the nicker didn't quite nick. As we come down this edge, we're going to clean it up. The only thing you're not going to clean up are these pieces here. So see how there's a little bit of the corners gone here. It's really up to you in the way that you're using it. But if that is visible, which I wouldn't recommend using this type of joinery in a particularly visible section, but if you are using it in a box or something, try and get it on the bottom. But you might just have to hand plane that and just make your part slightly narrower if that's an option for you, or take some care when you're actually doing it and actually use a chisel to sort of pre-cut that edge, so as you come through you don't blow the grain out, just like you would with a hand plane. If you're going across the grain, you can come back in the other way and just make a little relief first so it doesn't catch the grain and blow it out. So they're the options. So let's jump in here. I'll whack this back down on the bench here and we will do the long grain. And I'll just remove that cross grain nicker and hide that up because we don't need that now. So all set here, ready to go again. So we're going to come in here at that front end of it, slowly move backwards to the end. You might have already got a rebate down this end, so you're not going to come right to the end. Once you've done that, now one thing you've got to watch is where these shavings come out back here. The long grain ones, they really shoot out, so if your hand's there you might block them. And then it's just a simple process of working all the way through. And just making sure that your fence is referenced, because that's where you're getting your reference for square. So there you go, folks. As you can see, it's a pretty straightforward process to use a plane like this. It might be a little bit of fiddling to get your blade aligned correctly, get your nicker in place, get your fence held in right so it doesn't move. And that's really the difference between the Stanley, is that the holding on this fence, it can move a little bit. Whereas with this, the Stanley style, with the 2 pins, the 2 rods, this is going to stay parallel no matter what, because it's not going to slide on those pins if it's not. So I like both of these style of planes, but I think the Stanley one works just that little bit better. Now in my case, that's because this is a knockoff. It's not an actual record one, it's just a no brand one, but it still does do the job. And as you can see here, this is much quicker for doing a rebate than just using a handsaw and a chisel to do it. And you can see the repeatability is there because you're just pushing the plane straight through. It's doing all the referencing for you. And as long as you've got square ends and square edges, you're going to get perfect rebates in a fraction of the time. So you can see why I like using this tool for rebates. And if you're doing an entire project, you could save yourself hours and hours of work mixing this rebate or moving fillister up with a plow plane, and you're going to save so much time on your project, which is why I like using these specific planes. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below. If you got some value out of it, please consider giving me a super thanks. Or if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon. That link is in the description below. And if you like this video and you'd like to see some more videos related to this moving fillister, please check out the video up here where I'm going to put a link once we've done the video for sharpening the cross grain nicker. And I'll leave the intermediate playlist that this video is part of. Bye for now.